The divorce papers landed on my desk with a theatrical flourish. My husband Clayton stood in the doorway of my home office, arms crossed, wearing that smug expression I'd grown to despise over our 8-year marriage. "What's this?" I asked, though I knew exactly what it was. "Freedom," he said. "For both of us. Let's be honest, Bryn. This marriage has been dead for years." I picked up the papers, scanning the terms. He wanted the house, the cars, half my retirement account, and monthly alimony. The audacity was breathtaking. "You think you're entitled to alimony? You've been employed our entire marriage." Employed at a nonprofit, I sacrificed higher-paying opportunities to do meaningful work while you climbed the corporate ladder. I deserve compensation for that sacrifice. I looked at my husband, really looked at him. Clayton had always been attractive, charismatic, the kind of man who could charm anyone. That's how he'd charmed me 8 years ago, before I realized his charm was a mask for breathtaking selfishness. "I'll have my lawyer review this." "Your lawyer?" He laughed. "Bryn, I've already consulted with the best divorce attorney in the state. He says I have an excellent case for significant assets and ongoing support." "We'll see about that." He walked away whistling. Actually whistling, like he'd just won the lottery. If only he'd known what I'd been planning for the past 6 months. If only he'd realized that this divorce was exactly what I'd been waiting for. Let me back up 6 months. That's when I discovered Clayton's affair. I came home early from a business trip, exhausted and jet-lagged, looking forward to surprising my husband with an early return. Instead, I was the one surprised. Clayton and his co-worker Piper tangled together in our bed, in the house I'd paid for, on the sheets I'd bought. I stood in the doorway for exactly 10 seconds before turning around and leaving. I didn't scream, didn't confront, didn't throw things. I just left, drove to a hotel, checked in, and sat on the bed in stunned silence. My husband was cheating on me. In our home. With a woman he'd mentioned casually dozens of times as just a friend from work. The betrayal was crushing, but beneath the hurt, something colder was forming. Calculation. I'd spent 8 years supporting Clayton's meaningful nonprofit work that paid him $45,000 annually while I earned $280,000 as a senior director at a consulting firm. I'd bought our house. I'd bought our cars. I'd funded our lifestyle while he pursued his passion for changing the world through community organizing. And now he was cheating on me, probably expecting I'd discover it eventually, file for divorce, and he'd walk away with half of everything I'd built, not if I could help it. I spent that night in the hotel researching divorce law, asset protection, and evidence gathering. By morning, I had a plan. The next morning, I went home. Clayton was there, looking guilty but trying to hide it. "You're back early. I thought you were coming home tonight." "Meetings finished early. How was your day?" "Oh, just the usual. Work stuff." He was lying to my face, smoothly, like he'd done it 100 times before. Maybe he had. I'm exhausted, going to take a nap. In our bedroom, I looked at the bed where I'd seen him with Piper. The sheets had been changed. He'd tried to erase the evidence, but I had evidence. I'd taken photos on my phone yesterday, time-stamped and geotagged, clear images of Clayton and Piper in our bed. I didn't need those photos to know what I'd seen, but I needed them for what came next. Over the next 6 months, I played the role of oblivious wife while I built my case. I hired a forensic accountant to analyze our finances. I hired a private investigator to document Clayton's affair. And most importantly, I hired one of the best divorce attorneys in the state, the same one Clayton would later brag about consulting. Except, I'd gotten to him first. My attorney Bernard was in his 60s, brilliant, and ruthlessly efficient. "What are your goals for this divorce?" he asked at our first meeting. "I want to protect the assets I've earned. I don't want to pay alimony to someone who's been cheating on me, and I want Clayton to understand that actions have consequences." "That's doable, but we need evidence and strategy. How patient are you?" "Very patient. I can play the long game." "Good. because we're going to let him think he's winning right up until the moment he loses everything. Bernard's strategy was elegant. First, we documented everything. The private investigator followed Clayton and Piper for 3 months, photographing their meetings, their romantic dinners, their weekend getaways. Clayton thought he was being discreet, but he was sloppy. Cheaters usually are. The forensic accountant discovered something interesting. Clayton had been hiding money. Small amounts at first, $200 here, $500 there, transferred from our joint account to a separate account I didn't know about. Over 3 years, he'd siphoned off nearly $40,000 of my earnings. This is financial fraud, Bernard explained. In a divorce proceeding, this will destroy his credibility and any claim to additional assets or alimony. How do we prove it? We subpoena his bank records. Once we have those, the transfers are undeniable. But we didn't move yet. We waited. Bernard wanted Clayton to file first. Let him show his hand. Let him make demands. Then we'll counter with evidence that destroys his position. The psychological impact of thinking he's winning and then losing dramatically is part of the strategy. So I waited. I played the role of wife, sleeping in the guest room, claiming work stress, avoiding intimacy, existing in parallel to Clayton rather than with him. He seemed relieved, probably because it gave him more freedom to be with Piper. I watched him carefully during this time, seeing him clearly for the first time. Clayton was a narcissist. Everything was about him, his feelings, his needs, his disappointments. If I had a bad day at work, he'd somehow make it about his struggles. If I achieved something, he'd diminish it or change the subject. I'd spent 8 years catering to his ego, and he'd spent 8 years taking everything I offered while contributing the bare minimum. The affair wasn't the problem. It was a symptom of the larger problem. Clayton fundamentally didn't value me. I was a resource to be exploited, not a partner to be cherished. During those 6 months, I also took practical steps. I opened a separate bank account and redirected my paycheck. I transferred important documents to a safe deposit box Clayton didn't know about. I made copies of everything: tax returns, account statements, property deeds. I changed the passwords on all my personal accounts. Bernard had advised me on all of it. Asset protection before filing is critical. You want to make sure you have control of your own finances before the legal proceedings begin. Is this legal? Absolutely. You're not hiding marital assets. You're protecting your individual earnings and documents. Everything we're doing is above board. The private investigator's final report was damning. 73 documented instances of Clayton meeting with Piper outside of work, 18 romantic dinners, 5 weekend trips to a bed and breakfast 2 hours away. Multiple instances of them entering and leaving each other's apartments. This is airtight, Bernard said, reviewing the photos. He can't claim this was a one-time mistake or emotional indiscretion. This is a systematic, ongoing affair. What about the financial fraud? That's even more damaging. He's been stealing from you for years while simultaneously planning to take more in a divorce. The judge will not look favorably on that. When do we make our move? Soon, but let's wait for him to file first, like we discussed. It'll be more dramatic that way. 2 weeks later, Clayton filed for divorce, and I was ready. The morning Clayton served me with divorce papers was the culmination of 6 months of planning. I looked at his demands: the house, the cars, half my retirement, monthly alimony, and I almost laughed. He thought he was going to walk away with hundreds of thousands of dollars. Instead, he was going to walk away with nothing. I'll have my lawyer review this, I told him calmly. You do that. But Bryn, my attorney says I have an excellent case. You've been the primary earner, I sacrificed career opportunities, and I deserve to be compensated for supporting your career. Supporting my career? Clayton, you've done nothing but undermine it. Every success I had, you diminished. Every promotion, you complained that I was working too much. You've been a dead weight, not a support. His face darkened. That's not fair. I've been an emotional partner. You've been an emotional vampire. But don't worry, the court will sort out who deserves what. After he left, I called Bernard. He filed, just like you predicted. Perfect. Let's file our response, and Bryn, this is going to be very satisfying. Our response to Clayton's divorce filing was devastating. We didn't just contest his demands, we filed counterclaims for return of the $40,000 he'd stolen, full ownership of all assets purchased with my income, and a request that he be responsible for his own legal fees due to marital misconduct. We attached the private investigator's report, documenting his affair in excruciating detail. We attached the forensic accountant's report, showing every fraudulent transfer over 3 years. We attached financial records proving I'd paid for everything: house, cars, furniture, vacations, even Clayton's student loans from before we were married. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Clayton's attorney received our response on a Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, I received a call from Bernard. Clayton wants to negotiate. Already? We just filed. The evidence spooked him. His attorney knows they have no case. Clayton's been caught committing financial fraud and adultery. The judge will crucify him if this goes to trial. What's he offering? He'll walk away with nothing if you agree not to pursue charges for the financial fraud or demand repayment of the stolen funds. I thought about it. No. No? I want the money back. All $40,000, plus interest. He stole from me, Bernard. He doesn't get to steal and then negotiate keeping the stolen money. That's going to push this toward trial. Are you sure? Completely sure. Clayton needs to face full consequences. Otherwise, he learns nothing. Bernard paused. Okay, let me make that clear to his attorney. But Bryn, this could get ugly. It's already ugly. Now it's just going to be honest. The negotiation process was brutal. Clayton's attorney kept trying to find middle ground, some settlement that would let Clayton save face and avoid complete destruction. But I wouldn't budge. He cheated. He stole. He filed for divorce demanding alimony and half my assets. Now he can face the consequences of his choices. We went through mediation, sitting in a neutral conference room with a mediator trying to find compromise. Clayton looked haggard, like he hadn't slept in days. Good. Bryn, please, he said during a break. Can we talk privately? Anything you say to me, you can say in front of the attorneys. I made mistakes. I know that. But destroying me financially won't fix anything. This isn't about fixing anything. This is about justice. You stole from me, cheated on me, and then demanded more money in the divorce. You gambled that I wouldn't fight back. You lost. Clayton's face twisted with anger. You've changed. You used to be kind, compassionate. I used to be a doormat. Now I'm a woman with a backbone. If you don't like it, that's your problem. The mediator called us back in. I don't think we're going to reach an agreement today. Mr. Morrison, your position is simply untenable, given the evidence. I'd strongly advise you to accept Ms. Avery's terms. Clayton's attorney whispered urgently to him. I could see Clayton's resistance, his refusal to accept that he'd lost. We'll take our chances at trial, Clayton finally said. Bernard and I exchanged glances. Perfect. Trial was scheduled for 3 months out. During that time, I focused on my career and my well-being. I started therapy to process the betrayal and rebuild my sense of self. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my marriage. I rediscovered hobbies I'd abandoned. Turns out I'd lost myself in the marriage, too. I'd been so focused on supporting Clayton, on making him feel valued and secure, that I'd stopped nurturing my own needs. No more. I joined a women's professional networking group and was shocked by how many had similar stories. Successful women married to underachieving men who resented their success and eventually tried to profit from it in divorce. It's a pattern, one woman told me over drinks. They marry us for our success, then resent us for having it, then try to take it when they leave. Why do we tolerate it? Because we're taught to be supportive partners, to lift our spouses up. But some people interpret support as permission to be parasites. That resonated deeply. Clayton had been a parasite, feeding off my success while contributing minimal effort. As the trial date approached, Clayton made one final attempt at negotiation. His attorney called Bernard. "My client will accept Ms. Avery's terms: 0 assets, 0 alimony, and repayment of the $40,000 in stolen funds. But he's requesting a payment plan for the repayment. He doesn't have $40,000 in liquid assets." "That's because he spent it," I told Bernard, "on Piper and their affair. He can get a loan or sell his car. I don't care how he gets it, but I want my money back." Bernard relayed the message. Clayton's attorney tried one more angle. "Mr. Morrison is willing to repay the funds over 5 years in monthly installments." 12 months, I countered, "and if he misses a payment, we take him back to court for the full amount plus penalties." After a tense back and forth, Clayton agreed. The divorce settlement was finalized without trial. I kept the house, the cars, all assets purchased during the marriage, and my full retirement account. Clayton kept his personal belongings and his debt. He would repay the $40,000 over 12 months, $333 per month, plus interest. No alimony, no shared assets, nothing. The judge signed off on the agreement with a pointed comment. "Mr. Morrison, you're fortunate Ms. Avery isn't pursuing criminal charges for the financial fraud. I suggest you fulfill your repayment obligations promptly and consider this a lesson learned." When the final papers were signed, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't realized I was carrying. 8 years of marriage dissolved. And I'd protected everything I'd worked for. After the divorce, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Clayton was struggling. His relationship with Piper had fallen apart once the affair was no longer exciting and forbidden. He'd had to move into a cheap apartment because the repayment plan consumed most of his income. His co-workers had discovered the affair and the circumstances of the divorce, damaging his reputation at the non-profit. I felt no sympathy. He'd made his choices, and he was living with the consequences. Meanwhile, my life was thriving. I got promoted to vice president at my firm, a role I'd been working toward for years. I dated casually, focusing more on rediscovering myself than finding a new relationship. I traveled, visiting places Clayton had never wanted to go. 6 months after the divorce, I ran into Clayton at a coffee shop. He looked tired, older. "Bryn, hi." "Clayton." Awkward silence. "How are you?" he finally asked. "Really good, actually. You?" "I'm managing. Look, I've been wanting to talk to you." "About what?" "About everything. The marriage, the divorce, how it all ended. I've been in therapy, working through some things." "That's good. Everyone should be in therapy." "I realize now that I took you for granted, that I was selfish and entitled. I thought I deserved your success because I was married to you, but I didn't contribute to building it. I just consumed it." It was the most self-aware thing I'd ever heard Clayton say. "I appreciate you saying that. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I did wrong." "Okay." He hesitated. "Are you happy? Really happy?" "I am. For the first time in years, I'm happy." "Good. You deserve that." He walked away, and I sat with my coffee, processing the encounter. A year after the divorce, my friend Stella threw me a divorce anniversary party. It sounds morbid, but it was actually celebratory. A dozen women, all successful professionals, many of whom had their own divorce stories, gathered to celebrate my freedom and resilience. "To Bryn," Stella toasted, "who refused to be a jackpot for a man who did nothing to earn it." Everyone cheered. We shared stories late into the night, tales of terrible ex-husbands, ex-boyfriends, ex-partners who'd tried to exploit their success. "Why do men do this?" one woman asked. "Not all men," another corrected, "but enough. I think some men are raised to believe they're entitled to benefit from a woman's success without contributing equally. Especially if the woman earns more," I added. "That threatens their masculinity, so they punish us for it while simultaneously trying to profit from it." Clayton thought the divorce was his jackpot, Stella said. Half your assets, alimony, the house. He'd calculated it all out. Until I made my move, I said. Until you revealed you'd been planning your own strategy for 6 months. Everyone laughed. The party felt like a reclaiming of narrative. For years, I'd been Clayton's wife. Now I was Bryn, successful VP, independent woman, someone who'd fought back against exploitation and won. 2 years after the divorce, Clayton finished his repayment plan. The final check arrived on schedule, $3,333 plus interest. I deposited it and closed that chapter permanently. I'd recovered everything he'd stolen. The money itself didn't matter much. I'd replaced it with earnings long ago, but the principle mattered. Clayton had learned that stealing from me had consequences. Around that same time, I started dating someone new. His name was Owen. He was a high school teacher, and he earned about a quarter of what I did. I was nervous about that initially. Would this become another Clayton situation? But Owen was different from the first date. I'm a teacher because I love teaching, he told me. I'm not trying to get rich, I'm trying to shape young minds. Is that weird? No, it's refreshing. I know you're successful, Stella told me. Is that going to be a problem? Some guys are intimidated. Are you? Intimidated? No. Impressed? Yes. You've built an incredible career. That's attractive, not threatening. We dated slowly, carefully. I was cautious, watching for signs of the entitlement and resentment I'd experienced with Clayton, but Owen was genuinely supportive. When I got promoted to senior VP with a significant raise, he took me to dinner to celebrate, insisting on paying even though I knew it stretched his budget. I'm proud of you, he said simply. You work hard. You're brilliant at what you do, and you deserve recognition. You don't feel weird about the income difference? Why would I? We're not competing. We're partners. Your success doesn't diminish me. It was such a stark contrast to Clayton's constant need to be the center of attention, to diminish my achievements so his didn't look so small by comparison. 6 months into dating Owen, I told him about Clayton and the divorce. The affair, the financial fraud, the 6-month strategy to protect my assets. Wow, he said when I finished. That's intense, but good for you for fighting back. You don't think I was too harsh? Harsh? He stole from you, cheated on you, and then tried to take more money in the divorce. You protected yourself. That's not harsh. That's smart. Some people think I should have been more forgiving, that making him repay everything was vindictive. Those people probably haven't been stolen from by someone they trusted. You set boundaries and enforced consequences. That's healthy. His validation meant more than I'd expected. 3 years after my divorce, I was in a board meeting when my assistant interrupted with an urgent message. Your ex-husband is in the lobby. He says he needs to speak with you. My blood ran cold. Clayton was here? At my office? I excused myself and went downstairs. Clayton was there, looking nervous and out of place in my company's sleek lobby. What are you doing here? I need to talk to you, please, just 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I led him to a small conference room. What do you want? I'm in trouble. Financial trouble. My nonprofit shut down and I've been struggling to find work. I have debt, I'm behind on rent, and I was hoping you might be willing to help. The audacity left me speechless. You're asking me for money? Not money? Maybe a loan? Or help finding a job? You're well connected, and I thought, let me get this straight. You cheated on me, stole $40,000 from me, demanded alimony in the divorce, and now you want me to help you financially? I know how it sounds. It sounds like you haven't learned anything. Clayton, I am not your safety net. I am not your backup plan. Whatever financial trouble you're in, you created it. Figure it out yourself. Bryn, please, I have nowhere else to turn. That's not my problem. We're divorced. You have no claim to my resources, my help, or my time. This conversation is over. I stood up. He looked desperate. I've changed. I'm not the same person I was during our marriage. I don't care. Even if you've changed, that doesn't obligate me to rescue you. Learn to stand on your own. I walked out, leaving Clayton sitting alone in the conference room. Security escorted him from the building a few minutes later. That evening, I told Owen what happened. He came to your workplace, asking for money? After everything? Apparently, he's in financial trouble and thought I might help. That's delusional. I know, but it also clarified something for me. Clayton hasn't changed. He's still the same entitled person who thinks other people should solve his problems. The difference is I'm no longer willing to be exploited. Good. You owe him nothing. That incident made me realize how far I'd come. 3 years ago, I might have felt guilty refusing to help. I might have been swayed by his apparent desperation. But now I saw clearly. Clayton's problems were not my responsibility. He'd made choices that led to his situation, and he needed to face those consequences without me bailing him out. 4 years after the divorce, I married Owen in a small ceremony with close friends and family. It was nothing like my first wedding. No elaborate affair trying to impress people, just genuine celebration with people who mattered. Stella gave a toast. To Bryn, who learned the hard way that not everyone deserves access to your success, and who found someone who celebrates it instead of exploiting it. Everyone raised their glasses. During our honeymoon, Owen and I talked about finances. We decided to keep separate accounts for our individual earnings, with a joint account for shared expenses. I never want you to feel like I'm taking advantage of your income, Owen explained. We're partners, but we're also individuals with our own financial autonomy. That means a lot. I learned from your experience with Clayton. I saw how destructive it is when one partner exploits the other. I never want you to feel that way with me. I don't. That's why I'm marrying you. 5 years after the divorce, I was keynoting at a professional women's conference. The topic was Protecting Your Assets and Your Future, Financial Autonomy in Relationships. I shared my story about Clayton, the affair, the financial fraud, and the strategic divorce. I spent 6 months planning while pretending I didn't know what was happening. I told the audience of 500 women. That patience saved me hundreds of thousands of dollars and taught me something important. You don't have to accept exploitation just because someone calls it marriage. The audience was rapt. When Clayton filed for divorce, he thought he was getting a jackpot. Half my assets, ongoing alimony, the house. He'd calculated his payday and expected me to roll over and accept it. Instead, I'd already built a case documenting his affair and his financial fraud. When we filed our response, his attorney knew immediately they had no leverage. Clayton went from expecting hundreds of thousands to getting nothing and having to repay everything he'd stolen. After the speech, dozens of women approached with their own stories. So many had experienced similar situations, partners who resented their success, who tried to profit from the divorce, who felt entitled to assets they hadn't earned. What advice would you give someone in that situation now? One woman asked. Document everything. If you suspect your partner is cheating or stealing, gather evidence before confronting them. Talk to a lawyer before filing for divorce. Protect your assets before the legal proceedings begin. And most importantly, don't feel guilty for protecting what you've earned. Another woman asked, "How did you find the strength to fight back? I'm in a similar situation, but I'm scared of making it worse." I was scared too, but I realized that staying silent would be worse. Letting someone exploit you just to keep the peace isn't peace. It's surrender. The conference speech led to media opportunities. I was interviewed by several business publications about financial autonomy in relationships and protecting assets in divorce. One interviewer asked, "Do you think your ex-husband has learned from this experience?" I hope so, but whether he has or hasn't, it's not my responsibility to ensure his growth. He made choices that led to consequences. What he does with those consequences is his business. Do you regret the marriage? I regret staying as long as I did. I regret not seeing the red flags earlier, but I don't regret the experience because it taught me what I won't tolerate and showed me I'm capable of fighting back when exploited. What would you say to him if you could? I thought about it. Nothing. We have nothing left to say to each other. That chapter is closed. 6 years after the divorce, I received a letter. It was from Clayton, forwarded through Bernard's office since Clayton didn't have my current address. Dear Bryn, I'm writing to let you know I've finally gotten my life together. I have a stable job, I've paid off my debts, and I'm in a healthy relationship. I've spent years reflecting on our marriage and my behavior. I was entitled, selfish, and exploitative. I took your success for granted and tried to profit from it without contributing equally. I'm not asking for forgiveness or response. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I did wrong, and I'm working to be a better person. I hope you're happy. You deserve happiness. Sincerely, Clayton. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. It didn't change anything. Clayton's growth, if genuine, was good for him, but it didn't undo the past or obligate me to respond. Owen read the letter and asked, "How do you feel?" "Indifferent. I'm glad he's doing better, but it doesn't affect me. That was a different life." 7 years after the divorce, I was promoted to Chief Operations Officer at my firm. It was the culmination of 15 years of work, and I'd gotten there on my own merit, with a supportive partner who celebrated rather than resented my success. At the celebration dinner, Stella asked, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd stayed with Clayton?" Sometimes. I'd probably still be successful career-wise, but I'd be miserable personally. I'd still be catering to his ego, making myself smaller to make him feel bigger. Instead, you're a COO, married to someone who thinks you're brilliant. Exactly. Life is so much better when your partner is supportive rather than exploitative. Owen raised his glass. To Bryn, who refused to be anyone's jackpot and became her own success story. That night, I reflected on the journey. 8 years married to Clayton, 6 months planning my exit, a strategic divorce that protected everything I'd earned. Then 7 years of rebuilding, of finding myself, of creating a life that was genuinely mine. Clayton had thought the divorce was his jackpot. He'd calculated the assets, planned how he'd spend the alimony, probably fantasized about living comfortably off my earnings while pursuing his relationship with Piper. Until I made my move. Until I revealed that I'd been planning too, building evidence, protecting assets, preparing to fight back. The look on his face when he received our response, when he realized he wasn't getting a jackpot but was instead facing consequences, that moment had been deeply satisfying, not because I wanted to hurt him, but because justice was being served. 8 years after the divorce, I wrote a book. The Strategic Divorce, Protecting Your Assets When Your Partner Sees Dollar Signs. It detailed my experience with Clayton, but also provided practical advice for people in similar situations. The book became a bestseller, particularly among professional women. "You've turned your worst experience into something that helps others," Owen noted. "That's powerful." I kept thinking about all the women who don't know they can fight back, who accept exploitation because they think that's just how divorce works. I wanted them to know there's another way. The book tour was extensive. At every event, women shared their stories. So many stories of partners who resented their success, who tried to profit from the divorce, who felt entitled to assets they hadn't earned. "Your story gave me courage to fight back," one woman told me. "My husband was demanding alimony despite his affair. I documented everything, just like you did. He ended up with nothing. Good for you. He thought I'd roll over. He thought I'd feel guilty and give him what he wanted. But I read your book and realized I didn't have to. That's what I'd hoped for. Not revenge, but empowerment." 9 years after the divorce, I ran into Piper, Clayton's affair partner. She looked tired, older. "Bryn, I didn't expect to see you." "Piper, how are you?" "I'm okay. Listen, I've wanted to apologize to you for years. What I did, the affair, it was wrong. I was selfish and thoughtless." "Yes, you were. I know you probably hate me. I don't hate you. I don't think about you at all, actually. What happened between you and Clayton is between you and Clayton. We're not together anymore. Haven't been for years." I'm not surprised. Relationships built on betrayal rarely last. She looked like she wanted to say more, but I had nothing else to offer. That chapter was closed. 10 years after the divorce, I was featured in a major business magazine. The COO Who Fought Back: How Bryn Avery Protected Her Assets and Her Future. The article detailed my career, my strategic divorce, and my subsequent advocacy work. It included a quote from Clayton, surprisingly. The journalist had tracked him down. "I made terrible choices during our marriage," he'd said. "Bryn did what she had to do to protect herself. I don't blame her for that. I blame myself for putting her in that position." It was mature, self-aware. Maybe he had grown. The article generated enormous response. Women reached out sharing their own stories, asking for advice, thanking me for speaking openly about financial exploitation in relationships. I started a consulting service, helping women develop strategies to protect their assets during divorce. Working with attorneys and financial advisors to create comprehensive plans. "You've built an entire second career out of your divorce," Stella observed. "I've built it out of refusing to be exploited and helping others do the same. Clayton probably hates that you've profited from exposing his behavior. Clayton's feelings about it don't matter. This work isn't about him. It's about the women who need support and strategy." 11 years after the divorce, I was invited to speak at a law school about strategic divorce planning. The audience was future attorneys learning how to protect their clients. "The biggest mistake people make in divorce is being reactive rather than proactive," I told them. "My ex-husband thought he could surprise me with divorce papers and favorable terms. What he didn't know was that I'd been preparing for 6 months." "How did you maintain that secret for so long?" a student asked. "Because I understood the stakes. If I'd confronted Clayton immediately after discovering his affair, he would have hidden assets, destroyed evidence, and prepared his own strategy. By waiting and planning, I maintained the advantage." "Is that ethical?" another student asked. "Is it ethical to document evidence and protect your assets before filing for divorce? Absolutely. Is it ethical to spy on your spouse? That's a gray area. But is it ethical to let someone steal from you and cheat on you without consequences? No." The law students were engaged, asking detailed questions about strategy, evidence gathering, and negotiation tactics. After the lecture, several approached with personal questions. "My mom is in a similar situation," one student said. "She's successful, her husband is not, and she's worried he'll try to take everything in the divorce. What should she do?" "Talk to an attorney immediately. Document everything. Protect her assets before filing. And most importantly, don't feel guilty for protecting what she's earned." 12 years after the divorce, I received another letter from Clayton. This one was different. "Dear Bryn, I'm getting married. Her name is Kate, and she's wonderful. She knows about our marriage and the divorce, knows about my mistakes and my growth. I'm writing because I wanted to thank you. The consequences you enforced, the accountability you demanded, it forced me to examine myself and change. I'm a better person now because you wouldn't accept exploitation. I don't expect a response. I just wanted you to know that your refusal to be a doormat ultimately helped me become someone worth knowing. I hope you're happy and thriving. You deserve it. Clayton." I showed the letter to Owen. "That's big of him." "It is. I'm glad he's found happiness and growth." "Are you going to respond?" "No. But I'm genuinely happy for him. His growth doesn't undo the past. But it suggests the consequences taught him something. That evening, I thought about the journey. 12 years since I discovered Clayton's affair, 11 years since the divorce was finalized, a decade of rebuilding, of advocacy, of helping other women protect themselves. Clayton had thought the divorce was his jackpot. Instead, it was mine. Not financially, though I'd protected everything I'd earned. But personally, the divorce forced me to develop a backbone, to learn to fight for myself, to refuse exploitation. Those lessons had shaped everything that came after. 13 years after the divorce, I was invited to speak at the United Nations during their International Women's Day event. The topic was economic empowerment and financial autonomy. Financial exploitation in relationships is a global issue, I told the international audience. Women in every country face partners who resent their success, who try to profit from their earnings, who feel entitled to assets they didn't earn. I shared my story as a case study but emphasized it wasn't unique. For every woman like me who fights back successfully, there are dozens who don't have the resources, the knowledge, or the support to protect themselves. We need systemic change, stronger financial literacy education, better legal protections for marital property, and cultural shifts that celebrate rather than punish women's economic success. The speech was well received. Afterward, women from various countries approached with their own stories. The specifics varied by culture, but the pattern was universal: successful women being exploited by resentful partners. In my country, women can't own property, one woman told me, so even if they earn the money, their husbands control everything. That's exactly the kind of systemic inequality we need to fight, I said. The UN work opened new doors. I began consulting with international organizations on women's economic rights, helping develop policies that protected women's assets and earnings. 14 years after the divorce, I reflected on how one betrayal had shaped my entire trajectory. If Clayton hadn't cheated, if he hadn't stolen, if he hadn't filed for divorce expecting a jackpot, I would have stayed married to him probably for decades, probably miserable but not quite miserable enough to leave. His betrayal had freed me, not intentionally. He'd thought he was cashing out, but in trying to exploit me one final time, he'd forced me to develop the strength and strategy that defined everything that came after. 15 years after the divorce, I retired as COO. I'd spent 25 years building my career, reaching the top of my field, and I was ready for something different. Owen and I bought a house in Colorado near the mountains where we could hike and enjoy slower-paced life. But I didn't stop working entirely. I continued consulting on strategic divorce cases, particularly complex high-asset situations where one partner was trying to exploit the other. "You're the divorce avenger," Stella joked during a visit. "I prefer advocate for financial justice. Whatever you call it, you're terrifying to entitled spouses everywhere." Good. They should be terrified. Exploitation should have consequences. One case particularly stood out. A female surgeon earning $600,000 annually was facing divorce from her husband who'd been unemployed for 6 years. He was demanding half her retirement account, the house, and $10,000 monthly alimony. "Does this sound familiar?" she asked me during our consultation. "Extremely familiar. How long have you known he was preparing to divorce you?" "About 8 months. I hired a private investigator who discovered he'd been consulting with attorneys and hiding assets." "Smart. Have you documented everything?" "Everything. I have his affair with 3 different women documented. I have evidence of him siphoning money from joint accounts. I have proof that he's been deliberately unemployed, refusing job offers because he planned to profit from the divorce. Then you have everything you need to destroy his case." We built a strategy similar to the one I'd used with Clayton. Within 6 months, her husband's demands collapsed. He ended up with minimal assets, no alimony, and a requirement to repay the money he'd stolen. "How can I thank you?" the surgeon asked after the settlement. "By passing it forward. When you meet women in similar situations, help them. Share what you've learned. That's how we create change." 16 years after the divorce, I received unexpected news. Clayton had died, heart attack at 52. His wife Kate called to let me know. "He wanted you to know that he was grateful," she said. "For what?" "For holding him accountable. He said you taught him that actions have consequences, and that lesson changed his life. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. And Bryn? He was a good husband to me. He'd learned from his mistakes with you. You made him better." After the call, I sat processing the news. Clayton was dead. The man I'd spent 8 years married to, who'd betrayed me, who'd tried to exploit me, was gone. I felt complicated. Not grief exactly, but a strange sadness for wasted potential. If Clayton had been the person in our marriage that he apparently became for Kate, we might have had something real. But people often learn the wrong lessons from the wrong relationships. I was the lesson he needed to become someone better. That evening, I told Owen about Clayton's death. "How do you feel?" "Sad that he died so young. Glad that he apparently grew and had a happy second marriage. Grateful that I'm no longer connected to him. That's healthy. I spent so much energy fighting him during the divorce, but ultimately enforcing consequences helped him become better. That's something." 17 years after the divorce, I was interviewed for a documentary about financial exploitation in relationships. They wanted my story as the centerpiece. "Why did you fight back so aggressively?" the filmmaker asked. "Because someone had to. Because if I hadn't, Clayton would have profited from exploitation, and because I wanted other women to see that fighting back is possible." The documentary, titled The Jackpot, When Divorce Becomes a Payday, aired on a major streaming platform, Breakonsap. It featured my story alongside several others, women who'd successfully fought against exploitative partners, and women who'd lost everything because they didn't know how to protect themselves. The response was overwhelming. Millions of views, trending on social media, think pieces in major publications. "You've sparked a national conversation," the filmmaker told me. "About what?" "About the intersection of gender, money, and power in relationships. About how we define contribution in marriages. About whose success is valued and who's entitled to profit from it." The documentary led to policy discussions. Several states introduced legislation to strengthen protections against financial exploitation in marriage and divorce. It wasn't comprehensive reform, but it was progress. 18 years after the divorce, I looked back on the entire journey with perspective. Clayton had bet on me being weak, being accommodating, being willing to be exploited one more time to avoid conflict. He'd lost that bet spectacularly. The 6 months I'd spent planning the strategic divorce, the aggressive pursuit of consequences, all of it had been necessary, not just to protect my assets, but to establish boundaries and demonstrate that exploitation wouldn't be tolerated. Had I been too harsh? Some people thought so. But those people hadn't been stolen from by someone they trusted, hadn't been cheated on in their own home, hadn't been expected to fund someone else's comfortable lifestyle while receiving nothing but resentment in return. I'd done what I needed to do, and in doing so, I'd discovered strength I didn't know I possessed. 19 years after the divorce, I was asked to write a retrospective for a major publication. Looking back, how a strategic divorce changed everything. I wrote honestly about the betrayal, the planning, the divorce, and the aftermath. About how refusing to be exploited had shaped my entire life trajectory. Clayton thought the divorce was his jackpot, I wrote. He'd calculated his payday, half my assets, monthly alimony, the house. He thought I'd be too hurt, too overwhelmed, too eager to move on to fight back. He was wrong. Instead, I'd been planning for 6 months, building evidence, protecting assets, preparing for war. When he filed, thinking he'd catch me off guard, I was ready. When his attorney received our response, they knew immediately they had no case. Clayton went from expecting hundreds of thousands to getting nothing and having to repay everything he'd stolen. But this story isn't really about money. It's about refusing to accept exploitation just because it's dressed up as marriage. It's about standing up for yourself even when people think you're being too harsh. It's about understanding that consequences aren't cruelty, they're accountability. Clayton is gone now, died several years ago. By all accounts, he'd become a better person. He'd learned the lessons our divorce taught him and built a good life with someone who valued him. I'm genuinely glad for that. But I don't regret the fight. I don't regret being aggressive in protecting what I'd earned. Because that fight taught me I could stand up for myself, that I didn't have to accept exploitation, that my success was mine, not a resource for someone else to harvest. If you're reading this and you're in a similar situation, married to someone who resents your success and is planning to profit from your divorce, know this: you can fight back. You can protect what you've earned. You can refuse to be someone else's jackpot. It won't be easy. It will require planning, patience, and the willingness to be seen as harsh or unforgiving, but it's worth it. Because on the other side of that fight is freedom, self-respect, and the knowledge that you stood up for yourself when it mattered most. The article went viral. I received thousands of messages from women who'd been in similar situations, who'd fought back successfully, or who were preparing to fight. 20 years after the divorce, I looked at my life with deep satisfaction. I was happily married to Owen, who celebrated my success rather than resenting it. I'd had an incredible career. I'd built a consulting practice helping women protect themselves. I'd written books, given speeches, influenced policy, all because Clayton had tried to exploit me one last time, and I'd refused to let him. He'd thought the divorce was his jackpot. Instead, it became mine, not because I wanted revenge, but because I refused to be exploited. And that refusal shaped everything that came after. If only he'd known what he was starting when he threw those divorce papers on my desk with that smug smile. If only he'd realized that his jackpot fantasy was about to become his worst nightmare. But he didn't know. And by the time he realized I'd been planning my own strategy, it was too late. The papers were filed, the evidence was presented, and his entire case collapsed. That's the real lesson. Don't underestimate the person you've been exploiting, because eventually they might stop accepting it, and when they do, they might be planning moves you never saw coming. Clayton learned that lesson the hard way, and in learning it, he inadvertently taught it to thousands of other people through my advocacy work. So maybe, in a way, his betrayal served a purpose. Not for him, but for everyone who came after. Everyone who learned from my story that fighting back is possible. That was his legacy. And oddly, I'm grateful for it.